Hello. Hello, I'm Chris Dial, and this is the North WVA meeting, and we're at the Ideas Gallery in Door County. And our speaker today is Dan Cross, who will be talking to us about his work, but then also about other things that have to do with the gallery and representing yourself, etc. So welcome, Dan.
Well, thanks, Chris. I just wanted to start out with a quote here. It's called, "We make art to connect, not to stroke our egos, not to win awards, not as bragging rights or achievement, not to complete, compare, or replicate, not to pretend. We make art to connect, to others, to memory, to ceremony, to the earth, to water, to the deep fire within, to our own energy and the wings waiting. We make art to connect to life." Victoria Erickson, from her book Rhythms and Road, which it's a very interesting process of being an artist, whether you're a dabbler and self-taught artist, or you've gone to college, graduate school. Some people make art all their life from when they're little onward. And then sometimes, because of circumstances, you might get out of college, you don't have as much opportunity to work, and you might be, you want to do it, and maybe someday. Well, that's kind of how I was. I trained in painting, ceramics, and photography. And I worked over the course of I had a graphic design marketing studio. I worked over the course of my career, not every day by any stretch. We raised the kids, they were through college, and then we moved up here, and then I got more time. Once I had the gallery, we had the off season, that's when I did most of my work. But I just wanted to show a few pieces that are photography. And I'll say it's going to lead up to some of my latest work, which is a hybrid of all three disciplines: photography, ceramics, and painting. And when I talk about painting, I'm also going to be talking about digital painting. So during the season, I do some digital painting because it's one of those media where you don't have to worry about it drying. I can't get back to it until Wednesday or Thursday. Well, I can work for an hour and I can pick it up 4 or 5 days later. So initially, if anybody saw the photography show that I was in with Terry Lipinski and David Graham at the Hardy Gallery two seasons ago, this is just a small image of it, of one piece. Most of my work deals with abstraction. So this is water reflection of a dock boat with the big orange, ball bumpers. This particular piece represents my influence from the textural qualities of ceramics. Now I'm going to switch over to digital painting. Digital painting is very similar to traditional painting in the sense that you start in the background and work forward. My digital work may have anywhere from 40 to 60 layers. And people go, "Oh, then you print it?" I do print my own work, but then you print it in that many layers? And I said, no, I composite the file into one image, and then it is printed. And I have an archival. I have an Epson 9900, and also Epson PC 6000 that I print my work on. And most of the paper or canvas that I use are made in Germany.
Yeah, Stan, what is that paper? That hand mill paper?
This
Yeah.
and
Oh, okay, okay.
German etching. Now, I'm showing you this piece, which is digital painting. This was influenced from way back when I was in college, from Chaco Canyon down in New Mexico. And there was some light coming down into the kivas on the walls. And kivas are like 12 foot, down into the earth. And that's, all this time, I probably did this about 4 years ago. All that time in between something that you experience and how it comes out in your artwork.
Dan, how do you title your pieces?
Well,
Things you've
I'm
been
showing
showing.
you right now a series that is all about the Chaco Canyon experience. And I've always been interested in Native American and indigenous culture. That, for instance, I showed that piece because that's about 40 layers. Now this has about 20 more layers.
Mhm.
And so this one is called the Ascension. And it's basically about how the shards of pottery, which were all over Chaco Canyon, piece themselves back together. And just ever so faintly, in this area, that's a circle and a ghost image of the rim of this pot. So that's why it's called the Ascension. This is the circle of life. So back to your question. How do you title work? For me, it's about the experience. And you don't start out necessarily with me have an idea, but you don't have the title for the work. For me, the title comes at the end. And sometimes it's not immediate. Sometimes you have to think about it. What was I trying to convey? And what do I want to convey to the viewer through the title without telling everything what the piece is? Also from that series.
Such a beautiful blue.
So in this layering, this is the digital painting, in the layering process, and I could turn this. Actually, that is the way it goes. Sometimes I try to do things that I draw and paint using two programs, Adobe Illustrator and Adobe Photoshop. And I try to mimic some techniques that would look like woodcut. I will do things outside of the computer also that would be drawings that I can photograph, and then I bring those into the computer digitally, and I use that as a layer. Now I don't necessarily do those in color outside of the computer. I'll do them in black on white paper, because then I can take that black, create a mask, colorize it, create transparency, and that's how you see the richness of all these other colors coming through the layers. Technically, I sometimes try to strive to do something that's different than you would not typically see. You wouldn't look at this and say, oh, that's a digital painting. Not that I'm necessarily trying to confuse the viewer by the, what is it, a pastel, is it a woodcut? I'm not that interested in that. It's just for me, what am I after? Now, my printer, pigment printer, does not print white. So when you look at this real chalky blue, that looks like pastel, and I still have some colors coming through it. I create a mask in whatever shape that I have there. And I have to bring like watercolor where you have to almost create like a resist so the white of the paper comes back through. Is what I do technically here. So the white is mixing with the blue, and I've got this real chalkiness, which is really atypical from the process.
Are you collaging in photographs, as well as the drawings, in the works, or is some of the previous image of the chocolate pen with the pottery, is the pottery a photograph, is it a drawing, is it?
There are occasions where I'll use some of my photography in a piece. When I'm talking about photography, most of the time I'm photographing elements that I've done by hand outside of the computer, whether it's brush work that I want to, this big arm motion. You can't necessarily do that same feel like you can in a computer. So I may try to capture that and then bring it in, but I already have in mind how I may want to use that, or I have an archive of all sorts of different marks that I've made with different tools. And I know where those are in my folders, and I can grab that, bring it in as a layer. So this, there's no photography in here. And again, this is part of the Chaco Canyon series. I call that the Anasazi thing that I did. And this is supposed to represent almost a spiritual ceremony down in the Kiva, where this might be some, drum making, motions in here. This could be, part of the pottery. But what I was trying to capture was the smokiness. Now, I never saw that, but I'm trying to imagine. And that comes from a lot of campfires, seeing smoke, and want to try to replicate the feeling, to show one last one. As you can see closely there, in the bottom left-hand quadrant, those are all drawings that I did outside of a computer. And then I put that on a layer that's probably about 15 layers back, but there's layers underneath it. So very subtle, this rock formation, kind of abstract, maybe petroglyphic looking. And this was almost like an aerial view of Chaco Canyon, when I was, because they're in the upper mesa, and I almost did not make it down before sunfall. And that stayed with me all my life. Then we explored the natural resources too, of the indigenous, and these are little, no one will ever see it probably, but these are little dollar bills.
Are you, do you feel fairly satisfied with the generation of color and from what you work with on screen to what results in the print? Do you feel like you're?
I do. I have my monitor calibrated to my printer, and so 96-7% of what I have on that screen is how it's going to print out. If I'm not getting the exact effect that I want after I put in it, there's still, it's not like a firing where the outcome you're not exactly sure what you're going to get, even though you put on a glaze that you know what it's supposed to look like, or the interaction of a couple different glazes. If it's not quite where I want it, or maybe I want that color intensity a little bit more, I can up the layer, one or two of those layers of saturation, So I can bump up that a little bit more for a vibrancy. Now, you can do that in traditional painting too. Just get back and look at it. Not quite there, what does it need? And then you add that into it. These, I'm only showing, I never showed this, but this was a test of different mark making where it was supposed to represent the spirits within like a cave.
Now, when you say these are tests, they're not on the same paper, they're smaller, they're testing
This is
the
just a
colors,
smaller sheet, same kind of paper.
same kind of paper, okay?
I've tried so many different papers, but these for the type of effect that I want, where it really starts to feel a part of the paper. There's a little bit of texture to it, so it's similar to like a 300-pound weight watercolor paper. Now this one's called Clay Ghost. I did a large version of this that actually incorporated clay into it over the top in some of these shapes. So it had a physical relief to it. Now I don't have that piece available right now. So all that being said, show the mixed media piece that you know, see that. Now this is the hybrid between painting and ceramics with the textural quality. And let's lay this back down. I'm always, you know, people ask me, where do your ideas come from? And I've explained as far as Chaco Canyon. But in Door County, the escarpment is very important to me. So I tell people, when you look at this piece, have you ever been to Cave Point? And people, oh yeah. I said, well, if you've ever looked down at the rock shelves down below when the water is low, then you see the rock shelves. Sometimes there's, you know, through the water if it's high. So that's what the influence of the idea was for that. So there are a lot of layers in that piece, which incorporated paper and canvas folded, dipped in cement, and painted over. And there's a little bit of powdered clay mixed in with some of the paints too, to give it a little different textural feel. This is my latest work. Which is called, it's, again, I work in series. This is called the Seeing Make Believe series, called Remnants. And the reason it's called that way, called that title, all three of my disciplines, photography, this is a photograph of mine mounted on panel. The top right quadrant there, that's part of the photograph. Artists are notorious for keeping a lot of stuff and collecting. Me, one of them. This is paper that was blowing off the bar when they re-roofed it 2 years ago. And this is clay, not fire, but it's mixed with a binding agent. And when it dries, clay 10 to 15%, it shrinks. So when it shrinks, it crackles. And the finer I put it on, the finer, for the thinnest I put it on, the finer crack. And then top, it's about 3/8 of an inch and get larger. But I can't control it perfectly, but I know what it's gonna be. I tint that clay before I put it on, as well as down here, and then I've painted some washes over the top I painted into here a little bit to get that wash effect. This is cement over here, over the photograph, then painted look like steel, rusted steel. So I was excited about those pieces. I did 3, this is the one that's left. I didn't sell and had hoped to do a lot of work, which I knew wasn't gonna happen this winter because I had both music played. So sometimes as the artist, you get pent up, you know, you have all these ideas and you wanna get them out and share it and can't do it. So I'm hoping this summer I'll set up a studio on our outside gallery space and be able to do some work there. So that's pretty much for the processes that I use.
Does anyone have any questions?
Yeah, just the clay that's on the surface, how do you keep that from flaking off? What's keeping that adhered to the surface?
One more
The
thing.
clay that's on your surface, how are you keeping that from flaking or breaking off,
This-
cracking off? Yeah.
Because of why it doesn't come off, the binding agent that I have in here. Think of it as like a glue,
Okay.
and that's mixed in with the clay. When I put the clay on here, it's totally flat. And when it dries, that's when it crackles, but there's enough of that binding agent in it. And before I put that clay down, I put a coating of that binding agent on it too.
Okay.
And so there's, it's solid.
You don't put any pins up, like holding the concrete in place?
Feels that, that's why it's called remnants.
What is the binding agent?
I'll show this. Just for the sake of how big my printer can go. So this is the digital painting on canvas.
Daniel, Mark was asking you, what is the binding agent?
Like ultra bond. It's beyond the glue.
Is it the same thing that's used in paper? Is it the same material used in paper?
It would be
Like paper
for
bond?
like wall boards,
Okay.
for when you're, trying to get something that's never gonna come off. That kind of.
Like more than applying wallpaper, something like.
It's a
Another
construction
name is,
adhesive?
it's used to be called Durabond,
Okay,
Oh,
you know. This is very similar to it.
So Dan, they're wondering, do you get it through a construction store or do you get
I
it through
ordered
an art
it, I
supply?
ordered it online.
Through an art supply or through a different company?
I don't know if it was Dick Blick, Autorama, one of those. Yeah. I know some of you in you different medias that you worked in. I was going to try to address how I pick artists for the gallery. And also a little bit about how do you price your work and consistency in your work. It's very atypical to get into a gallery and do the multiple things that I do. That's a luxury of owning the gallery and can do anything you want. But as a gallerist, when I take submissions in November, we can get anywhere from 45 to 80, depending on the year. And throughout the year, I'm also looking for artists. We have 50 artists that we represent, so I'm looking for work that is distinctively different, that's just gotta knock my socks off. And invariably, artists that are older have more consistency in the body of work. Not that I won't show somebody that, young. What artists don't, when they're starting out, realize it's a partnership between the gallery and the artist. And so if I sell work of yours, you have to have work to be able to replenish, because that's, put a lot of effort into marketing the artist's work. And there's nothing you hate more than, oh, well, I haven't done anything, for the last 4 or 5 months, or I have all my work in the show. So when you start out as an artist, you're typically gonna have another job. Making a living as an artist is very difficult. One young artist that I tried mentoring worked in a grocery store 5, 6 days a week. And I featured it on that show, one of my first 2 years. And out of the 14 pieces that we had, like 8 or 9 sold the night of the opening. And I said, now, if you can get in, you want to get away from that grocery, stocking job, you have to get into 6, 7 more galleries who can, sell. Not every month you're going to have a gallery that's going to sell that many pieces. But you have to be able to supply that many. And if you have smaller price work to higher price work, you have more ability to have income that's going to come in from what I call the bread and butter work, when to the more expensive work. So for artists that was going to be in the gallery, I will say, okay, I can see when your submission is works are quite large, but do you do any work that's smaller? And oh yeah, I can do smaller paintings. I said, well, in a gallery, if you want to be more marketable, not one size fits all. And I'm talking about budget, wall space, both of those things. So if you have smaller work, oh, I love that big painting, but you can't afford that. And you have one that's $375 versus $2,750, you have more opportunity to sell more work. So that's something to keep in mind as an artist. So I'm looking for consistency in a body of work. Sometimes artists want to, and this is a big no, want to come into the gallery and it's right during the middle of the season. Would you take a look at some photos of mine? I'm an artist, and look at them, and there might be a dozen people in here. A gallerist will not do that. They might, on occasion, if I wasn't busy and they're looking at work intently, I may ask, are you an artist? And, oh yeah, what do you do? And carry on the conversation. And then, oh, would you like to see some? And then we look at it on the spot and say, oh, this is very nice. We take submissions, I won't take the work in during the season, but submit in November. That is something that you don't want to do. So in trying to get into a gallery, you need to do research. And the beauty of having the internet is that you can look wide as the whole United States, wide as the world, but geographic location and delivering work and shipping work plays a part into how wide of area you want to try to get into galleries. And it's very expensive to ship work. So you have to decide what level you are as an artist and where does your work fit in a gallery. So through that research, and you can look at all different artists they represent, and well, my work's too traditional for that contemporary gallery. I shouldn't really submit there because it just doesn't fit. So you have to be, you have to look at your work. You have to have other people look at your work to gauge what level it's at. Don't ask if it's mom or dad or uncle or, they're all gonna say, oh, that's beautiful. Oh, I really like that. Well, if you can get in a critique group, if you're younger, starting out, that's a great way to get some positive feedback. I try to, when submissions come, I'll take the time in replying to say, well, you could strengthen your portfolio submissions if you did can show these and, you know, this body of work is way stronger than these other pieces that you submitted. You have a better chance if you have a consistent body of work. So from there, how do you get into the gallery? First, you start out, and I've tried to say this to artists, that the first thing is that you have to believe enough in your work, and you have to continue doing it. And the more you do it, the better you're going to get at it. It's just like anything, it takes practice. So you might get up the courage then to enter your first show, a juried show, and you get in. Or maybe you don't. Maybe you don't get in for 6 or 7 times that you enter a juried show. You can't get discouraged. It can be very subjective in the jurying process. That being said, you get in. I like to say it's like climbing a mountain, but you never see the top. So that first stage, the first plateau level is that getting into a juried show. The next one would be you're getting in consistently. Oh, somebody might have, you got an award. Well, that could be a plateau. What are you striving for? The next would be that you get to be asked in a group show, and that's a plateau. The next one would be a solo show. And then maybe, oh, no, I think I'm going to try to get into some galleries. So, that's the next step in that process. You might start making a living, like, oh, I might be able to quit my job now, my regular job, because I'm making money doing artwork. Some artists get pigeonholed then because they're selling a work that they don't change. They start doing the same old, same old, same old. And maybe that's the plateau you want to stay at. You're comfortable at that, doing the same thing. But I think as artists, we have to continue challenging ourselves. And from a gallerist perspective, I do not pick artists first and foremost to whether I'm going to be able to sell it. Now that may be, I bet, atypical for most galleries, but I want our gallery to be distinctively different. We're called the Visionary Gallery of Contemporary Art. So you have to find out where that artwork of yours is going to fit in, do the research, send in the submission when you feel confident that your work is at a level for a gallery, and believe in yourself enough, and also that you can produce enough work to supply the gallery, because it's very important to have that partnership. So I think that's as much as I want to talk about that part. Does anybody have any questions in regards to that? Okay, now as a gallerist, I could talk about how I hang work a little bit. And that is done from the standpoint, my belief, whether you're hanging artwork in a gallery or hanging it at home, that the work that is placed around it has to have a dialogue, meaning the works need to complement or literally talk to each other. I like to use the expression that the gallery sings, back and forth, up the walls echo. There is a certain energy in here. I love coming here every day because no matter what you feel, you walk in here, it's like, wow, how fortunate this is my sanctuary that I can come in here and be surrounded by such amazing artwork. So there's a particular painting up here with a glass piece underneath it. The glass piece is in a boat shape. So not only I'm thinking about a viewer, a buyer, but I'm first looking at the relationship between the boat shape, the colors, how they complement each other. Now, people love doing coloring up here, and rock, shoreline, sailboats. I am, like I talked about my work and what my influence was from my experience, maybe someone's, in the sailing, and so that glass piece reminds them of this sailboat. So you try to look at some of those relationships that people, it might touch them emotionally. That's why that is. The next three pieces, glass, paper, and ceramics, are maybe an unusual combination of the material, but not from the shape standpoint. The glass and the paper piece, when I envision a show before I hang it about 75%. And then I'll start laying it out against the walls and seeing if it works. Well, these are three pieces that immediately I thought, oh, these are gonna work great together. Those have a dialogue, they speak to each other. It's a harmonious. One thing I will say, to artists, in regards to framing and size, I said small, medium, large. Now these three pieces are stacked. They're all the same size. If one of those was 2 inches different, they would not work well in stacking those. Why do I sometimes do that stacking? I know from being in many, customers' houses, or they say, I'm looking for I have this transition wall from one room going into another, from the foyer to the living room, and I need something tall and narrow. So those three pieces I've stacked that way because from a marketing standpoint, not thinking initially sales, but that's why I've stacked that. Down this corner, I'm playing off colorations of this glass piece. Back up. Some of the squirrels in here also play off this glass piece with these. But I'm playing the greens and the blues that come from this piece to here, and some of the movement of this ceramic piece. Every year I get in a few pieces where I go, that is absolutely amazing. And this was one of the pieces by Nancy Lee Davis that came in this year. Every day I look at this piece and I'm continually drawn into it. And maybe it's all the turmoil that we're dealing with in the United States, across the world right now, but the peacefulness of this work, I just go into it. And that's what art does. What I said in the beginning, it's about touching on aspects of our life. And that one, at him in my house in that heartbeat. Now, I wouldn't typically say that's my style. And I want to say that because I don't pick the work just because I like it. I have to pick work that's going to resonate to a wide audience. And so when I pick work, or I pick artists, it sounds odd too, in an alphabetical sense, not literally, but A to Z. A being the most conservative work that we have, and Z being way out there, which doesn't mean that it's bad way out there. The Nipsey assemblages on the wall, or John Whitney's metal sculpture here, those are amazing work on the opposite end of the spectrum. So I try to fit different media so that we're encompassing a great range of work from A to Z. Now that may be medium, it might be subject matter, it might be figurative. And going back into hanging the show, I like to think of the gallery, as I said, singing before in a musical sense, but it's also like reading a chapter in the book. You know, that's one chapter, a story over here, that story leaves this wall into here, and it goes around the room. And if I do that well enough, people take the time and it conveys what I hope is something that they really enjoy to experience. And that's a challenge that I really enjoyed. And part of my graphic design marketing background over 30 years and having the gallery now really plays in the sense of space, shape, and form, how it works together. One of the biggest things, as I mentioned, was these three pieces that stacked. I have three more similar to that. So if maybe someone buys all three, but maybe they just like the one in the middle. Now, if I have three more framed just the same size as gallerists, I can go and put up another one right there. So you have an opportunity to keep more work up just because you're working in a consistent size framing. Sometimes I see artists with these very ornate gold frames with a contemporary piece. It does not work. Simplify your presentation, make it professional. You'll see floating frames in here. You'll see the plexiglass boxes, the craftsmanship of how you assemble your work. Narrow frames are generally better. Neutral, black, occasionally just the edge of a panel or the maple frame on there, floater frame, or no frame at all, and the edge is painted. That can be another way to present. One thing I'll say is that framing is very expensive, and I try to get work from the artist early in the season or before the season begins, so that I can say, rather than frame 10 pieces, frame these three. If we sell one, and why I'm talking about framing, because a lot of artists don't realize material costs. When you have a frame that costs you $50 or $100 a frame, and let's say the gallery takes 50% commission or whatever the commission is going to be. So if that frame costs $100, you have to immediately double that just to recoup your costs. So $100 to $200. Now, as an artist, you have to value your hourly wage, just like any job. How much do you want to get paid an hour? I get asked all the time, how should I price this? And I'll help pricing. I said, how many hours do you put in this? Well, I said, on average, sometimes 30, 35. How much materials cost do you have? And you need to write all these down. And if it's $30 an hour and it took you 3 hours, multiply, put your framing costs in, that's what and the gallery commission, that's what your retail cost is gonna be. But you also need, if you're shipping the work, you have to add some shipping, to cover some of that cost. And I think that's just about everything that I know. Any
Well-
questions?
No, thank you very much, Dan. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, Dan, you could not have chosen a better name for this gallery.